Well, let's, of course, get more now on former President Jacob Zuma, who's attempted to ask the courts to block a midnight deadline for police to arrest him. You'll know, of course, that our Constitutional Court ruled last week that he be sentenced to 15 months in prison. The police minister and the police ministry have said today that he will actually be arrested unless there's a new directive from the Constitutional Court. Joined now by two legal experts, Tanvir Jiwa, a legal analyst, and the advocate Romeo Ntambaleni. Mr. Ntambaleni, if I may just start with you. At this stage, it would seem there are no more legal options. Yes, the police minister, the police commissioner have to act.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon to you and the viewers. He has to actually act because, absence of anything else, the order of the Constitutional Court stands.
All right, I think it's frozen there. Tanvir, if I can come to you, I mean, as the clock ticks down, the pressure is going to be mounting. I mean, are lawyers going to be looking for loopholes, or do you expect the police to simply act?
The police must simply act. Unfortunately for them, they have no other options left anymore. By 23:59, the arrest has to be made. The Constitutional Court order is quite clear that they must do so by all legal means available to them and necessary to get the arrest on. So unfortunately, there are no more loopholes, as the advocate has just mentioned. There's really no way out of this now.
Advocate Ntambaleni, when we look at where we are right now, a plethora of options seem to be explored in terms of what is available to the former president after this arrest, at least by way of trying to see him not serve any jail time. Explore some of those options for us.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. I think let's first deal with the first hurdle of him reporting and him being arrested, and then we can then deal with the options of what is actually available for him after the fact. And now if we do that, we'll be actually jumping the gun, because there is obviously presidential pardon. There's also, the period of serving a sentence, and if you've served half of the sentence. But let's first deal with him reporting to, to jail and confirm that he's within, the confines of the correctional services facilities. Then we can make a determination of what other options are available for him.
Advocate Ntambaleni, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that some of the options that have been put on the table, whether it is by those who sympathize in terms of the position that the former president finds himself in, or even his supporters, that those can only be explored once he has actually been imprisoned?
Yes. No, definitely. We cannot talk about those options when he has not reported. There's a standing order here of the Constitutional Court, and if that order is not implemented, we have got a challenge of the respect of the rule of law, in the country. So, all those options that are being explored can only come into play after the arrest has been successfully effected and he has reported to jail and is serving his sentence either way. Because now, if we start treating him differently from any other person that has been incarnated, then we are dealing with the issue of him being above the law. Because how can you explore options for a person who's not arrested of a presidential pardon? How do you deal with pardoning a person who has not reported to jail? That is applied to the Minister of Justice when the person is already serving his sentence, and it goes through the channels of the justice system, and the president has to look at whether there's merit to that presidential pardon at all.
Tanvir Jiwa, I can see you nodding quite furiously there. It would seem to me, I'm quite glad Kathy and I don't have to be the judges between two legal arguments. But Tanvir, I do want to put this to you. The story doesn't actually end tonight. There are a lot more chapters to come. So if the former president is arrested tonight and then the Pietermaritzburg High Court comes back on Friday and says, actually, he shouldn't have been arrested, what then? Would he be released immediately?
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of lawyers will have to agree and disagree here, because from a lot of us, our perspectives, myself included, we will say that the Constitutional Court remains the apex court of the country. There is no lower court that can overturn an order of the Constitutional Court. Mr. Zuma's lawyers should have applied for a Part 1 stay application with the rescission application at the Constitutional Court. So unfortunately, once again, we're faced with these hurdles of even maybe obscuring the way lawyers think. Is that going to happen? In my personal opinion, even if the stay application is granted, nothing is supposed to happen, because the High Court judgment cannot overturn the Constitutional Court order that Mr. Zuma is supposed to be in prison for 15 months. If he wanted to not have served this sentence, instead of just a rescission application to the Constitutional Court, he should have also applied for a stay order at the Constitutional Court. So these are, I think, legal tactics that are trying to blur our eyesight here, but really, at the end of the day, only the Constitutional Court can overturn its own order.
I want to stay with you and perhaps, just to talk about some of the language. The Constitutional Court in that order had said within 5 calendar days he needed to hand himself over. If he didn't do that, he would be arrested. Today we're getting reports that there has been some kind of agreement between the National Police Commissioner and the former president that he will hand himself over to police. Does it still count as handing himself over if the 5 calendar days have passed? I think that language will be important, but again, I'm not a legal person. If you can just clarify for me there.
Of course. So I think your question is a very important one. I think the option of handing himself over was over on Sunday. There's no more discussions of handing himself over now. Now it's quite literally only in the hands of the Minister of the Police and the SAP's National Commissioner. They are supposed to take Zuma in. Whether they want to call that Jacob Zuma handing himself over, that is absolutely up to them. But at the end of the day, they have a duty that emanates from the Constitutional Court order. And by 2359, if they are not taking Mr. Zuma under arrest, unfortunately, they will be found in contempt of the Constitutional Court order unless they have a just and reasonable reason, which I think that's another discussion. But just to answer your question, the option of handing himself over was absolutely gone by on Sunday at 23:59.
I mean, Mr. Ntambaleni, just to pick up on Kathy's point, I think this is an important point, because what this really means is that the former president was already in contempt of court by midnight on Sunday. If someone wanted to, would they be able to bring another application and say, well, he should be punished again? Or would that be a step too far?
Yeah, technically that is true, Steve, and it's a kept ball. Then it will obviously play to the narrative of saying that he's being persecuted if someone tries to actually do that. And as my colleague has actually rightfully said that him handing himself over was done by Sunday, and he has actually failed to hand himself over. Now, hence we are discussing about the pressure that is on the police now. Because the failure by the police to act when there's a duty to act from an order of the Constitutional Court make them to be a complacent, to failing of the execution of the order of the Constitutional Court. So she's quite correct to say that bus has already left the station and there's no more handing over of himself. Whatever happens tonight, if we see him in a correctional services facility, that is an arrest, actually. Because if that would have happened and he doesn't hand himself over, the police we're going to be held in contempt, definitely. And also to confirm what my colleague has said, the issue of the order in the Pietermaritzburg High Court is neither here nor there. The order should have been granted yesterday. The order should have been granted there, and then the reasons maybe for the order should have been granted later. But due to the imminent nature and the agency of this matter, to postpone this matter to Friday is to create another challenge.
Advocate Ntabeleni, I'm going to stay with you and perhaps just come to the issue of process. It's going to be important that process is followed, and in one instance, of course, we have the former president who has continually said that he's a victim of the system. On the other hand, there's the experience that ordinary people, you and I, would have to go through if we were faced with the same circumstances. So what is that ordinary procedure under the circumstances so that we're able to benchmark when things are not going according to process?
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy. Very good question. If it was you and me, we will not be having this discussion. On the order of the Constitutional Court saying arrest, we could have been wearing orange overalls the next day. So to show that we were actually dealing with a different person altogether, the Constitutional Court was aware that we are dealing with a former president. Let's extend a bit of courtesy to him to allow him to do an honorable thing himself. And by then failing to act, then we can instruct the police to actually execute the order. If it was you and me, And Stephen, we could have long been in prison and people could have forgotten the ink that the order of the warrant of arrest was actually written on a long time ago.
It's really such an interesting point because, Tanvir, this takes us back to what the Constitution says. All are equal before the law. It's absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. I think our Section 9(1) rights to all of us is that, as you said so rightfully, Stephen, we're all equal before the law. And as my colleague has mentioned earlier, the rule of law is very important here because it's grounded in the principle that no one is above the law. Everyone should be held accountable. So I think it's quite ironic that former President Zuma is pushing the narrative that he's been treated, not as equal, when actually, by not presenting himself to the police and by now trying to strike these, we're going to hand ourselves over now or whatever, it's simply not the case. As my colleague has just mentioned, if it was you or myself, we would have been at the police station already, we would have been arrested, we would not have been afforded that courtesy. So it's quite interesting that he's playing into the special characteristic of I'm not being treated equally, when in fact this is playing in his favor.
Tanvir Jiwa, legal analyst, advocate. Romeo and Tambaleni, I really do appreciate the time. Kathy and I, if I can speak for her, we both really appreciate the time on the Pulse tonight. Thanks very much indeed.